Good morning, great souls. My subject today is polarization, spirituality, and the individual. So let's first look at each one of these words separately. I looked up polarization on the encyclopedia, and it says, or the dictionary, it says, polarization means division into two sharply contrasting groups, sets of opinions, or beliefs. So that's the official definition of polarization. And spirituality, I didn't need to look that up because it's sort of my cup of tea. I am on a spiritual path, and my spiritual path is mostly a path of yoga. So yoga and the word spirituality itself implies union. The literal meaning of yoga is union, and that can imply union in a religious sense when the soul unites with God. That is union, that is yoga. Or when you're more philosophically inclined, you can say the little self, the ego, that unites with the higher universal self. That is also called yoga or spirituality. Or on a more psychological level, you can say it is integration of the personality. So where the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and our intuition, they all sort of are one integrated whole, and you don't have this defragmentation, a fragmented personality, fragmented into different types of reactivity. So that is spirituality, polarization, spirituality, and now the individual. And there I looked it up. I looked the etymological source of that word, and it says in Latin, in the medieval Latin, individuus, which means that cannot be divided. So individual means that which cannot be divided. So can you imagine there is some confusion there? Well, let's first say a little bit more about the individual. It is a very important word because great masters of yoga, and I will not go into the details right now, but it's sort of my working ground, the context in which everything that I'm going to share with you can be considered. The age that we live in, it's a new age, and it started around 1900, and it is the age of the individual, which means that everything that all our convictions, all our religion, our political convictions, our social convictions, our moral convictions can no longer be imposed by some social authority. It still is, but this is something that is destined to disappear completely, and what remains is the individual and the individual experience. So once the individual learns to trust through spiritual development his own or her own inner experience, then they can come together with other individuals and work together for some common cause, some ideal. So the individual is, let's say, it's no longer the family. It used to be the family in Christian theology and especially the Catholic Church, but it's the family that is the cornerstone of society. I don't believe this will hold very long. I think it will be the individual in the end, because individual experience is the only thing that validates whatever we want to do with our lives, that will give it power, will give it the power of conviction, that will magnetize it. So now let's get back to the word polarization. So we have this individual that cannot be divided. It's individuals, that which cannot be divided, and it stands in front of a world in clear division. Let me just put this a little bit better so that I can cheat better when I talk to you. So there is a certain degree of suffering when polarization happens. Why? Well, on a global level, polarization, when it becomes more pronounced, will inevitably lead to war. It is when people of opposite political convictions, economical interests, stop talking to each other, and then war will follow. So I remember about 10 years ago, I was a school teacher here in my community, Ananda Sangha, and I remember I had to teach World War I. I was teaching history at that time, and I loved it, by the way. It's just, for me, history is like a school for ourselves. How do we can look at ourselves, or we can look at collective past, and we can learn so many lessons. So what was the lesson, one important lesson that stuck with me about World War I when I was studying that? Well, one of the main causes for that conflict was the fact that there was no neutral country. There was no country that was neutral. All countries were either on one side, and then you think of Germany and Austria, which were both empires in those times. So they were not just countries, they were empires. Germany, the German Empire, the Austrian Empire, and then on the other side you had Russia, France, England, and at a certain point also Italy. So when there was no mediation was possible, there was just only total, complete polarization. And then the conflict started, the war broke out, and the way that war was fought is very indicative, very typical for polarization, because it was a war that was fought in trenches. So the enemies were both entrenched. They were both in trenches, and then their commander would give them the command to go out and attack, and then most of them would be just, die. But trenches, two enemies in different trenches, two groups of enemies in different trenches, that gives a very clear idea of what polarization is and what it brings. There is no neutral land. The land between the trenches needs to be won by one or by the other. And where the truth is, God knows. We'll talk about truth more during this talk. So that is and of course, needless to say that a war always brings suffering. I have not lived war, I haven't that personal experience, but I come from Holland. My parents were young when the Netherlands were occupied by the Nazis. I don't say the Germans, I say the Nazis. And they told me all sorts of stories that were just, heartbreaking. So war is always suffering. It never brings any solution. Okay, so why is polarization then? Why does it bring suffering on a more personal, intimate level, on an individual level? I think because it brings separation. Okay, when, let's say, in a marriage, for example, a man and wife, husband and wife, or the two partners, married partners, at a certain point they get into a flow in their marriage where polarization is happening. And it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And in the end, they cannot find any, common ground is more sort of a political word, but they cannot find a common space of affection, of meeting, of intimacy. And then what happens is separation. And it has been rightly said that there are no happy divorces or separation. It brings suffering. Well, and this is not only, in the case with marriage or romantic relationships, it's also with friends, between friends. Sometimes friendships are dissolved by polarization about politics, and it's terrible. Okay, so separation for the individual always brings pain, even though the individual, as we said before, is undivided, cannot be divided in itself. It is already a complete entity in itself. But it wants to feel, I guess, its own wholeness, its own completeness. And it looks for that sense of completeness, of complementation. I don't know if that's a word, but it needs to be, tries to be complemented by relationship with others, love relationships, friendships, brothers, sisters working together, companions. And that is what the individual does in its need to feel the wholeness that is already his or hers. It's already ours because it cannot be divided. It's already complete in itself. That's the meaning of the word. Anyway, so the suffering through separation comes not so much because of the separation itself, but because the individual loses that investment that he or she had made into feeling more complete by having a relationship with another human being. So separation brings pain, polarization brings separation, and separation brings pain. So in any case, the most enduring solution lies in the third word of this talk, which is spirituality. Because suffering leads to spirituality. Once the individual, the suffering individual, begins asking questions, no longer, oh, why me? Why do I have to suffer? This is so terrible. But the other question is, what do you want me to learn from this? And if you don't believe in God, you can ask your own life. Life. I mean, I'm alive. You've given me life. You're in my body, my heart pumps, I breathe. What do you want me to learn from this separation, from this suffering, from this pain? And then answers will come, but they don't come with a vision, especially if you're not religious. But maybe if you are religious, you will have a vision and some good solutions will come, but answers will come somehow. They will sneak into your heart, and you will gradually begin to experience a sense of expansion and intuitions and ideas. And it will take time, and the pain will not go away overnight. It is part of growth process, and that's the good thing. So the opposite of suffering may be joy, or pain. The opposite of pain may be pleasure, let's put it that way. But pleasure is not the same as joy. Pleasure comes and goes, but joy, the kind of joy that comes when there is growth happening, that stays. So when suffering takes us to a point where we start asking the right question, namely, or let's say the most productive question, namely, what can I learn from this situation? What am I, if you want to make it even more humble, what am I supposed to learn from this situation? Then somehow a growth process is set into motion, and we will experience ourselves a little different over a longer period of time. That joy does not go away. It's a very subtle joy. People may not see you, all of a sudden laughing every day. They might still see you a little bit, even melancholy or sad. But underneath, the real thing that's happening is a form of very subtle joy, and it will not be taken away from us. There is a very thrilling, what I find a thrilling quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the most important scripture coming from India, and that we study a lot on our path of yoga. And he says, to those, I'm quoting off by memory, so I may make little inaccuracies, but he says, basically, he meaning Krishna, the great teacher, the great incarnation of God, he says, to those who find me, I will make good their deficiencies and permanent their gains. So what does this imply? So the individual suffers, starts asking the question, why? The answer will always be that the suffering is brought about by choices that I, the individual, made in the past. There is always a law of cause and effect in working. So in the past, I did certain things. I was, and it can be the recent past, can also be a very distant past. And by understanding that law of cause and effect, I take responsibility for what happens to me. When I take responsibility, there is a sense of empowerment. When there is a sense of empowerment, there is a sense of growth. So, and then Krishna says, I will make good your deficiencies. So, meaning, yes, you've made mistakes. Well, who doesn't? Don't worry about it. Just make sure that you're going in the right direction. And then he says, I will make permanent your gains. And in this case, for me, that means that the spiritual growth that happens once you start learning the lessons that life brings you, the spiritual growth that happens, that is a joy, subtle, deep, that cannot be taken away from you. It is a gain that God himself, or that your teacher himself, or that your soul itself, or that your higher self itself will make permanent. It will be yours. So that is thrilling. Now, I wanted to give you an example of how suffering can lead to spirituality, and then spirituality leads to joy, to happiness. So my spiritual teacher's name is Swami Kriyananda. He was a direct disciple of my guru, whose name is Paramahansa Yogananda, very well-known author of the international bestseller, spiritual bestseller, Autobiography of a Yogi. So Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda himself founded an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship. And my teacher, and dearest friend, by the way, Swami Kriyananda, lived with his guru in that organization. The headquarters were and still are in Mount Washington in Los Angeles. During the 3.5 years, almost 4 years, that he lived with his guru spoke to him a lot. He gave him a lot of individual guidance. Now, there is a chapter in Swami Kriyananda's own autobiography, which is called The New Path, and the title of the chapter is True Teaching is Individual. It needs to appeal to something, true teaching needs to appeal to something authentic within our own heart. It can never, in other words, be assimilated through conformity. So you have an organization, which is good. I mean, when you want to spread a teaching, when you want to help other people, organizing, alas, is inevitable. It will be necessary. So you have an organization, and the organization serves the higher purpose of reaching out to individuals. Okay? And it gives structure, it gives levels, it gives, it communicates. But then the true, what the individual does with those teachings remains in the bosom of the individual. It remains very intimate. So Yogananda took the very young Kriyananda, his name was then Donald Walters, he took him apart a lot and just gave him lots of instructions. Then the guru left his body at the age of 59. This was on March 7th, 1952, and leaving Kriyananda, and of course all his disciples, from a human standpoint, orphan. Okay, so all of a sudden they were without that thrilling, incredible personality. He was no longer walking in his body amongst them. What remained for all of them was the necessity to find or to especially to maintain an inner sense of attunement to that spirit, to Yogananda's spirit. I have met in my life many disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm one myself, even though I was born 8 years after Yogananda left this world. I was born in 1960. But all of them, or almost all of them, speak about attunement and about being able to feel their masters, their gurus, hand, their light, his presence in their lives, in their hearts, guiding them, offering them guidance. So after the guru had left his body, this was everyone's individual task. It was also Swami Kriyananda's task. And in the meantime, the organization was getting more organized, which is, of course, what an organization does. It became more like an institution, okay, where they edited the master's writings and they made it available, and they set a certain line of standards, certain set of standards and levels and all the things that happen with institutions, and still very useful probably for people to learn more, because Yogananda leaves us with a set of teachings that are just incomparable in my opinion, and that are like seeds that are planted in many hearts, and that will bring forth creativity and even scientific discovery. Many good things happen if we take time to study those teachings. So Kriyananda, young Kriyananda, he was in his 20s, was involved, of course. He became even vice president of that organization. But at the same time, the instructions that the Guru gave to him personally, okay, he was not able to fully carry out, because those were different, that those instructions did not align with the needs of the organization. The needs of the organization as they were defined by his, what we call Guru Bhais, meaning brother and sister disciples. They had another view, a different view of how the organization needed to be developed and what the priorities were. And for Kriyananda, one of the priorities was founding communities, small communities, not monasteries, but people who can marry, have children, etc., but then live together, buy land together, and try to live the spiritual life. So that was something that his master, his guru, had talked to him individually about very often. And there was like, in the beginning, just friction. And the friction mostly had, a negative effect upon Swami Kriyananda's health. Because he said, I will have to learn to live with ulcers because I can't do this. I know I need to conform to my master's organization, but at the same time, I know I need the freedom to be a creative disciple. I need the ability, I need to be able to manifest the enormous inspiration that he gave me and the guidance, which was to do different things with his life, with his service. So he wrote this whole story, by the way, in a book which is now out again. You can find it on crystalclarity.org, and it's called Go On Alone. So it's a very typical title. He changed the title. First it was published originally as A Place Called Ananda, but now it's called Go On Alone, and I can advise everyone to read that book. Whether you are interested even in Yogananda or even in Swami Kriyananda himself, because it reads like it has a lot of suspense. It's just about human relationships and how they work and how polarization happens, because that's what happened. Okay, there was an increasing friction between this individual, Swami Kriyananda, and many people who were in charge of the organization, Self-Realization Fellowship. And then he knew somehow, he didn't want to admit it to himself, but something, as he describes it in his book, Go On Alone, something within him knew that he had to follow his, the guidance that he had received from Yogananda, but he didn't know how. He couldn't do it because he was part of the organization, and he could, at that point, not imagine not being part of the organization. It's like a child being part of a family, and you have a safe family home. It's like a nest, and you have the nest warmth, the familial warmth. He had that, but he wasn't happy because there was this urge to expand in his heart that was planted there by his guru. So, to make the story short, and I urge you to read it yourself, he started developing certain things. He was sent to India, New Delhi, and he found land there to start a community. And so before he could find it, in order to find that land, it was an incredible accomplishment, because he had to enter the labyrinth of Indian bureaucracy, ended up talking with the then Prime Minister himself, Pandit Nehru, who had been Gandhi's assistant, and he knew how to present his project to this rather difficult man in such a way that he himself said, okay, I will walk the land near New Delhi and then give my permission. And he got permission. So while he was in that labyrinth, he did not notify his Guru buys his fellow disciples in Mount Washington of what he was doing, but he waited. And then when he had the okay, he wrote to Mount Washington saying, okay, I've got something for you. We have land, we can start a community. And they were, it was like a bomb that exploded there in Mount Washington. They thought that he was just setting himself up as the new guru, but Swami Kriyananda had been acting as he felt guided from within, and he had tried, let's say, to follow his guru's guidance, and he didn't know whether it was right or not. So he did what he did, but he was not attached to it. He could easily say, okay, well, if they want it, then they have it. And they meaning SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship. If they don't want it, then I'll let it go. Okay, so he experimented. He said, I wanted to see what happens if I did something without feeling a clear yes in my heart. So it was experimentation. And he was not attached to the result. So what he did not foresee was that they would falsely accuse him of being setting himself up as a guru. And so he was kicked out. He was expelled from the organization, and he found himself literally alone. Alone without his spiritual family, without his guru bhais. So that was a period of intense confusion, of suffering. And it was the result of polarization. In fact, one of the chapters in that book, Go On Alone by Swami Kriyananda, is named polarization. It leads to some form of tragedy. Okay, in this case, well, before we said it can lead to war, it can lead to divorce, it can destroy a friendship, and it can lead to the tragedy of one individual being expelled by an organization that he had served for many, many years. Now, the good thing, he was still an individual. Swami Kriyananda was still an individual. He was an individual. True teaching is individual. He had received instructions from his guru. So as an individual, that's all he could do. He could still continue to try to follow those instructions, to listen to that inner guidance, to allow the seed that his guru had planted in his heart to sprout. In the beginning, he was fearful, he was prudent, he was cautious because he thought, I can't do this. Because his organization, or the organization had told him, don't do any more public talking, speaking. Nobody should know that you were his disciple. Just take any job you can find, basically. It was, quite cruel, actually. So, but then he gradually went into accepted that every time when he withdrew from public life, there was a sense of closure, of contraction, of the doors closed. And when he got invitations to speak publicly, because he had so much to give, living 4 years, almost 4 years with a great master, and then having this close contact, and also with the total dedication that he had towards his master, you have something to share. He had blessings to share, many deep blessings. And so he felt that when he spoke in public, when he accepted, with trepidation, but accepted the invitation to speak in public, good things happened. Okay, his heart went open, people were inspired, they came to him saying, he got new invitations, and gradually he became one of the better known yoga teachers in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. And San Francisco was in those days, together with my own city of birth, Amsterdam, the capital of the flower power movement, and of the hippies and of the communes. And so it was a unique coincidence, unique he calls it, that in that period he was finally able, he still had the youth, the energy, the right age, he was in his early 40s, I believe, or late 30s, to start Ananda, to buy land, and then with a small group of people start a community. And that has, from that seed that he planted, that he started, a whole new movement has grown. And now we have communities in the United States, not only Ananda Village, which was the one he started back then, but also in Portland, in Seattle, in the Bay Area near San Francisco, Palo Alto. And we have a community here in Europe, in Assisi, which I am part of. So, by the fruits shall ye know them. So we look at these fruits and we can see that the history was like this. There was polarization happening. He was expelled, so they stopped talking to each other and they start fighting. Well, they did not start fighting each other in court, but after Swami Kriyananda started Ananda, he started his community. SRF started many legal battles against Ananda, because Ananda wanted to have the freedom to share Yogananda's teachings, and there were lots of complications and issues, and so polarization. There was no talking, even though many times Kriyananda said to the leadership of Self-Realization Fellowship, we're not against you, we are doing something that you're not doing, you are not interested in communities. So let us do that part, and we can work together. He tried to overcome polarization, but the polarization was there, and it brought suffering. Even after Ananda was started, it brought suffering, but it also brought a lot of empowerment, because Ananda having to fight, having to defend its own existence, also learned a lot of valuable lessons. We call that, with a nice Sanskrit word, tapasya. Tapasya means the austerity that you have to go through if you want to feel again that as an individual you are complete in yourself. So we are social beings. Okay, let's now move on to the final part of this talk. We are social beings. Okay, man is a social being. We are wired to have connections with each other. And even when you tend to be a very solitary person, even when you are a hermit in a cave, there will still be connection. People, maybe the typical hermit in the cave in the Himalayas, will be visited by his disciples. He may feel connection through his meditation with the world, with what's going on in the world. He will connect with the world through prayer. He may even, as they say, be able to enter people's minds, the minds of world leaders, and sort of work with their natural tendencies to steer their thoughts into a direction that creates more harmony and less conflict and war on earth. So man is a social human being. Man is a social being. It's very funny, because when we die, we are alone, of course. I mean, someone can help my little hand when I die, but that final act I need to do alone. So we are social beings and we are individuals. That means we cannot be divided. We are alone also. All one, alone. So in a world that polarizes, what can we do? Okay, what Swami Kriyananda did in his situation was just to always, he was a man who meditated every day, who did nothing without first meditating and praying and feeling guidance. So even when he was moving, in India, in Delhi, along those risky lines, he was still meditating every day. So he sought, in other words, completion in himself. And from that inner contentment, from that inner sense of completeness, polarization that happened around him didn't affect him as much. Of course, as a human being, it will always affect you. There will be pain, but when there is a space of solitude in your heart where you can withdraw and find solace and find strength again and find yourself again, your real self, your authentic self, then the pain hurts, but not so much. So what can we do then? So this withdrawing within yourself, there are a few interesting inspirations that I would like to share with you. And one regards a astrology. Vedic astrology, as it is practiced on this path of Kriya Yoga, as brought by Yogananda and Yogananda's guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was himself a great astrologer. So Swami Kriyananda wrote one little booklet about astrology. It's called Your Sun Sign as a Spiritual Guide. And it's precious because it describes the characteristic of each planet, but also especially of each sign of the zodiac. And the most inspiring description in the book that I found was Libra, how he describes the essence of Libra. I myself have some Libra influences in my horoscope. I have the moon in Libra, and the moon is basically your subjective self, your feelings, what you really feel. The sun is where you want to go to. The moon is what you really feel. So, moon in Libra, there is a tendency, Libra, when it vibrates on a lower octave, there is a tendency to want peace at all costs. Okay, I want, when there is conflict, there is restlessness. In the typically Libra heart, there will be restlessness, and he will do everything to find validation, to sacrifice his own emotional integrity. He will do everything in order to have peace, everything. And he will never have it. You will never have it when you do that. So he sacrifices even his own integrity on the altar of emotional turmoil, and what he gets back is emotional turmoil. But I want peace so much. It's not going to happen. Okay. So there is a higher octave to this sign, and there Swami Kriyananda, if I remember well, he says the higher octave of Libra is actually one of the most spiritual spheres in the heavens of all the signs of the zodiac, and it is where you can go if you attune to inner harmony. So in other words, you don't try to find harmony around you. You don't try to, let's say, impose harmony on a difficult situation. You don't try to impose harmony on the world. It's not going to happen. But you can look for harmony by bringing your mind, by elevating your mind, by bringing your attention at the point between the eyebrows, and then go into that realm where the stars of Libra are free. And there he says, Swami Kriyananda says, harmony cannot be created, it can be perceived. Harmony cannot be created, it can only be perceived. So you're very high up there in your prayers, in your meditation. You say, you don't pray, oh, let this conflict end. Oh, I'm so sorry that that person doesn't like me and that those two people don't like each other and they're going to separate and there will be war. You don't go there. You just say, oh, you go up there and you say, bring me to the consciousness, guide me to a consciousness of harmony. And then you attune yourself to those higher stars, that higher octave of Libra, and then harmony will be perceived. And when it is perceived, it will go into your heart and settle. And then when you go back to your social self again, you will be less inclined to impose harmony on others. But what you will do is you will radiate it. Okay? And people will feel drawn to you. But of course, you need to keep that engine of attunement, of meditation, of communion filled. You need to keep your mind attuned to that that high octave of astrological octave, in order to be steady in that harmony that you can radiate and channel. And that is the best thing that you can do to help other people. You can do this on your own, you can meditate on your own. A very good meditation that Yogananda gives is try to visualize the horizon. So you have, for example, the ocean, okay? And then there is a point where the ocean and the sea come together. The sky, he says, kisses the horizon, kisses the sea, and the sea kisses the sky, and they are together. And when you meditate at that point, then you are in the middle. You are in the eye of the cyclone, of the storm. In the eye of the storm, it all whirls around you, but you're standing there. And people will look at you and say, oh, that guy That person has a certain amount of happiness, of harmony. I want that too. So that is the only influence that we can have. It is the greatest gift you can make to the world, the only gift, really, against the suffering that is brought about by polarization. So, just to summarize, polarization will probably always happen in human lives at some point. On a personal level, it brings separation. Separation brings suffering. Suffering can bring spiritual growth. And when you have spiritual growth, you will experience a joy that you will not lose. So let's finish with, again, saying what Krishna says. When you find me, when you connect with me, so let's say you do your work and you connect with harmony, I will come and make good your deficiencies and permanent your gains. Thank you.